Let's get the thoughts now of the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge, Miriam Cates. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us on the show. So you are one of the 65 MPs and rising so far who has signed that no confidence motion in Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Why did you sign the motion to just stop Hoyle?
Well, good afternoon, Martin. I signed it with a very heavy heart, and I didn't sign it last night because I've got to be honest, it was too painful a prospect. I very much like Sir Lindsay Hoyle. I think he's been a brilliant speaker. He's a really, really nice man. He very much takes seriously the concerns of all members of Parliament. He's personally helped me with a number of security issues, so I bear him no ill will whatsoever. But I do think that the situation yesterday is bigger than about one man. It's about whether or not Parliament, whether or not the Speaker is being influenced unduly by threats, by pressure from outside. And unfortunately, the order of debate yesterday, the order of procedure absolutely was influenced by threats from outside. Now, I think we can all understand on a human level that Sir Lindsay Hoyle wants to protect the security of MPs. So does Sir Keir Starmer. Those are all admirable desires, of course. But the truth is that violent extremists, threats from violent extremists are putting so much pressure on MPs, particularly Labour MPs, that Sir Keir Starmer felt that he had to put pressure on Lindsay Hoyle in order for the votes to go his way. And that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable for our democracy. This is not about party politics at the end of the day. The MPs and the Speaker's first duty is to preserve our democracy. That is incredibly important. And yesterday, the integrity of our democracy was threatened, and I think it's very serious. And so I think we need to have confidence that a Speaker will not give in to that kind of pressure.
Miriam, I was outside Parliament yesterday. I was pelted with eggs. Fluid was thrown over me. I was abused. They were projecting images, pro-Palestine images, onto Elizabeth Tower, the Big Ben Tower. Police did absolutely nothing. They had absolutely no interest in stopping this. Signs were being held up saying your grandchildren will know how you vote today. The threat from outside, from the mob, Miriam, is now so big, it seems to be poisoning what's going on in the chamber. How can we stamp this out?
You're absolutely right. And this is why Suella Braverman, when she was Home Secretary, called for those protests to be stopped, because they are enabling this radical extremism, this terrorist-supporting, anti-Jew sentiment on our streets that's enabling people to feel emboldened to target MPs, to target people in public life. And this has been going on for over 4 months. You know, it's become a stronger and stronger force on our streets. I know British Jews who won't go out in London anymore at the weekend, who feel like they need to leave the country. That's a terrifying prospect. And yesterday, from inside Parliament, it was very frightening. We were being told by the House authorities which entrances we couldn't use for our own security. And I spoke in that debate. I got to admit, I thought twice about speaking in that debate because of my own safety and the safety of my family. I changed some of the words in that debate that I used because of those fears. And that's not right. You know, of course, MPs should be listening to the public. We should be listening to our constituents. But we should be speaking and voting on the basis of what we think is right, not on the basis of the violence that we fear might happen to us if we don't. But the problem is that we have to move forward from here. We can argue about how we've got to this position, whether or not the protest should have been stopped before now. But we are at this moment. We've got to recognise nationally that these extremist threats have got hold of our democracy, and now we need to work out together how we're going to clamp down on that. And I don't think that's about blaming any particular political party, but we've got to work together to recognise the threat to our democracy that we now face, and to look at how we're going to sort it out.
You're absolutely right to point out it's not just Conservatives. Of course, Mike Freer is standing away. There's murder of David Amos. Rachel Reeves has had abuse on the campaign trail. Sir Keir Starmer was harangued off a train in Scotland. Angela Rayner has had street-level abuse while out campaigning. The common factor is this growing Islamist sentiment, feeling that they're emboldened and they're marching through. Today, we saw that Prevent, our own anti-terror campaign, is too afraid to tackle this for fear of being called Islamophobic or fear of being called racist. Miriam, how do we grasp the nettle on this quickly? Because a lot of people are thinking that we're heading towards the thin end of anarchy.
I think the first step is for people to be bold enough to describe the threat, to speak it out, to say exactly what you've just said, to be honest about what's going on here. I think that's very important. But secondly, we do need the police now to crack down on what's happening on the streets. We cannot allow genocidal slogans. We cannot allow calls for jihad, for death to Jews, for the destruction of Israel to go unpunished on our streets. That's completely wrong. And I think what we need to re-establish is a sense of British democracy, British values, and that means a respect for Parliament, a respect for the rule of law, a respect for fairness and freedom. Those are the things that people in other countries look to our Parliament to uphold. But we've got to get control back of the streets, and I do think those protests need to stop now. I do think the police need to crack down very hard on any anti-Semitic, on any terrorist-supporting sympathies that are expressed on the streets. If it's got to the point where elected representatives are frightened of what they say in the chamber of the House of Commons, we know it's gone too far and it's got to stop.
Miriam, how can we do this? Because you keep giving the police new bills, but we don't have the will to do it. I saw last night multiple public order offences, men wearing masks, stuff being thrown around, anti-Semitic sentiment. The police are simply standing by and watching. They've been given more powers, but they don't have the will to do it. How can we empower them? Aside from giving them new laws, how can we make them want to fight for the future of the country by getting tough at street level?
Well, perhaps I'm old-fashioned, but I think it's the elected government and elected parliament that should have power. Even the police, of course, we should have every respect for the police, but the government should be in charge of the police. And I think the Home Secretary should have the power to compel the police to prevent these marches. And of course, that is what we know the former Home Secretary was seeking to do, to stop the marches. And I think that's the first step. The Home Secretary should be able to compel the police to take particular action on this particular threat to our democracy. But then we need to follow up on William Shawcross's advice. You mentioned that he criticised the government's response to his Prevent review last year, that we have not implemented all the actions that he recommended. I think that's the next step. We've got to crack down on terrorist sympathisers. And don't forget, it's not just MPs that are under threat here. It's not just British Jews. It's the whole of British society, including British Muslims, who are under threat from a small number, but a very loud number of extremists who are now influencing our democracy wrongly. So, we owe it to everybody. The government owes it to everybody to take control of this, but stopping the marches and making sure that we follow through on those Prevent recommendations would be a good first step.
OK, excellent stuff. Miriam Cates, the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stockbridge, thanks very much for joining us on GB News this afternoon.